Hi everyone, welcome back to our medical ethics class. This week we're going to talk about abortion. So firstly, I'll quickly sketch the context of abortion and the rough shape of the abortion debate and what is the current situations within legal and political spheres. And then we're going to talk about different philosophical arguments surrounding abortion. We'll also talk about the specific papers we read for this week. So that will be in the next lecture. The starting point will be the historical and cultural background. So let's have some context first before we can really dive into the philosophical arguments. So abortion has existed for thousands of years. So in the ancient world, there was debates just like today. So for instance, Aristotle, for example, supported abortion in a lot of different cases, like if the child would be born deformed or the family already had too many children. So the Hippocratic Oath, often cited as an ethical foundation for doctors, actually prohibited giving women substances to induce abortion. But even in ancient Greece, not all physicians follow that rule. So there have been debates and struggles regarding this topic since long past the day. So a lot of people wonder, so why abortion was common in the ancient world despite some moral or religious objections and despite very rigid religious and moral constraints. So and I think the fact that even in the ancient world abortion was common even added complexity and importance to this issue to what is discussed in the context today. You might assume that religious traditions have always been against abortion, but the reality is much more complicated than this. So in the Bible, there's no direct condemnation of abortion. So one passage in one of the texts implies that causing a miscarriage is not equivalent to murder. If a man causes a woman to miscarry, the punishment is just a fine, unless she suffers further harm. So early Christian views were also diverse. So the Catholic Church didn't always believe that fetus had a soul from the moment of conception. So Aquinas, following Aristotle, believed that ensoulment happened 40 days after conception for males and 90 days for females. So it wasn't until the late 1800s that the church settled on the view that personhood begins at conception. So it seems that cultural, scientific, and theological beliefs have changed over time and have influenced our moral judgments and our moral norms regarding abortion. English common law, abortion wasn't even a crime until after quickening. So that's when a woman first feels the fetus move. So typically around 16 to 20 weeks. So in the US, early abortion laws followed this model. But by the late 1800s, most states had banned abortion entirely, except to save the mother's life. So interestingly, this push came in part from the medical profession, which wanted to regulate reproductive medicine more tightly and reduce competition from midwives and home remedies. So there was also this part of the context. So I'll also quickly cover like some basic biology. So a lot of the ethical debate depends on understanding fetal development, and those words come up a lot. So there is fertilization. So there is one crucial point which is 5 days, and then another crucial point is 8 weeks. Then there is also this stage which is called viability. So that's the stage when a fetus might survive outside the womb. So that's around 23 to 24 weeks. But survival is risky and often comes with disabilities. So these kind of points or time stages are very important to the abortion discussion. So there are also different types of abortion. So let's clarify the terms a little bit, just in case these come up in the literature. So there is spontaneous abortion, so that is miscarriage. There is induced abortion, so basically it's intentional termination of pregnancy. There is also therapeutic abortion, so that is done to preserve the life or health of the mother. So most abortions happen in the first trimester using either suction techniques or medication, certain medications. So the earlier the abortion, the lower the risk of complications. And then I'll quickly give some stats and rough sketch with what is abortion like in the US today. A lot of you might know this better than me. So right now, half of pregnancies are unintended. Over 19% of abortions occur in the first trimester. The risk of death from early abortion is less than 1 in 100,000, so 10 times safer than childbirth. And most women who get abortion are in their 20s, and over half already have children. So now that we've grounded ourselves in the history, biology, and cultural background, we are ready to talk about the moral debate. So we'll explore 3 main philosophical positions. So that is the conservative view, which argues that abortion is almost always morally wrong. And then the liberal views, which argues that abortion is morally permissible, so it can be allowed. And there is also the moderate view, which is in the middle between the two extremes. So the moderate view argues that it depends, and there is more nuance. So we'll try to apply major ethical theories like utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, which we've covered in the first week, and also natural law, which we haven't covered, but you don't have to worry too much about it. Just know like an idea like that has been floating around. So we'll see how each ethical theory might handle this issue right here. Firstly, let's talk about the conservative or pro-life view. So the conclusion by those group of philosophers is that abortion is morally wrong in almost all cases. So the core argument goes like this. So premise 1, so the first assumption or the first starting point they argue that it is morally wrong to kill innocent human beings. And then premise 2, or the second starting point they have, is that a fetus is an innocent human being, often from conception. So therefore, abortion is morally wrong. And the key moves they have, including, so they argue that personhood forms at conception. So by saying that, they just mean that biological humanity. So if you are biologically forming, then in moral philosophy or in moral considerations, you should have already been considered as a human. But for other groups of philosophers, that might not be true. So a lot of people just don't consider like a fetus or just the product of fertilization before 5 days. They don't think that's a person. They don't think that should be considered as a person in terms of moral debates. And the conservative or pro-life philosophers are pretty strict with their assumptions, so they think that there are no exceptions, so except possibly when mother's life is at risk. And they focus on right to life as the primary moral concern, so they think the fetus or they have a right to life as well. Then let's talk about the liberal or pro-life, pro-choice view. So the conclusion argued by them was that abortion is morally permissible in most or all cases. So the core argument is like this. So premise 1, only persons have a right to life. Premise 2, a fetus is not a person because they chose to base their considerations on psychological or rational traits. A fetus is not rational. They are not psychologically aware or responsive. And those two premises lead them to their conclusion. Therefore, abortion is not the killing of someone with full moral rights. So that is morally permissible. So the key moves they have are that, so firstly, they draw a distinction between being biologically human and being a person. So they think if you're biologically a human, you're not necessarily a person yet. They also put a lot of emphasis on bodily autonomy. So for instance, so you've read Thompson's violinist analogy. So they think that rights of actual persons are so much more than potential persons. It's also the moderate view, which argues that abortion is sometimes morally permissible, sometimes not. So that depends on context and stage of pregnancy. So the core argument they have is that personhood is not a binary but a gradual cluster concept. So you are not like a person or not a person. So there is a gradual process in between. And they also argue that early fetuses lack person-like traits, so that makes abortion more permissible. However, they think late fetuses resemble newborns. So in these cases, abortion is less justifiable for later fetuses. They think that as the fetus develops, they gradually get more and more moral status, but it's like a continuum or spectrum. You don't become a person like all of a sudden on a certain day. But let's now consider how the major ethical frameworks approach abortion. So each theory focuses on different moral criteria. So that means they think different things are good. So they have different criteria for what is good and what is ethical. So for the utilitarianists, the central idea is that they want to maximize overall happiness or minimize suffering. So that's what we've covered in the first week's lecture. So how it applies? So a utilitarianist would try to weigh the consequences for all affected. So pregnant women, a fetus, family, society. So early abortion may prevent long-term suffering for a teenage girl or in cases of poverty or trauma. Later abortion might be harder to justify if the fetus is developed and termination causes greater pain or societal distress. So for a utilitarianist, there is no fixed rule. So it's almost always case by case based on likely consequences. At least that is the rough sketch, right? But of course, even within utilitarianists, they might disagree with each other over abortion and over how we should calculate all these suffering and happiness. So it's actually a much more complex issue, and of course utilitarianism is much more complex than this. So if you're interested in this, you can go back to the lecture in the first week. Kantians, the central idea just is this. So they want to treat every rational being as an end in itself, never merely as a means. So how this might apply to the current context and issue we have. So they think that if fetus equals person with rational nature, then abortion is categorically wrong. You can't kill an innocent rational being. So if fetus is not a person, then focus shifts to the woman's autonomy and whether she is being used as a means. So strong emphasis on universalizability by the Kantians as well. So they want to consider, can I will that everyone in my situation act as I do? So of course, different Kantians might have different answers to this question, but they will agree that those are the important criteria that we have to consider for this issue. And philosophers who believe in natural law. So some philosophers following Catholic traditions fall into this category. So they argue that human life has intrinsic value. Morality is grounded in human nature and purposes. So how they would approach the moral issue of abortion then? So they would argue that human life begins at conception, so abortion just is killing of an innocent life, so that is intrinsically wrong according to them. They also argue that there might be the doctrine of double effect. So doctrine of double effect may allow abortion only if death of fetus is an intended side effect. So removing a cancerous uterus or something like that, if abortion is caused by that. and killing the fetus is not intended, then maybe abortion should be allowed, according to them. And they also argue that there should be no appeal to consequences or autonomy. At least appeal to consequences or autonomy cannot override the natural moral order, so the natural law they perceive. So that is all for this lecture. In the next lecture, we'll talk about the specific papers we've read for this week, and see you in the next lecture.